Hello everyone, how are you all? I hope everything going great. So today we have met to complete all the amendments that are applicable for CA CMA final September 2025 examinations. Now see, if your exams are in September 2025, then in that case all amendments applicable till 28 Feb 2025, that is 6 months prior to examination, are applicable to you. Now, if you have version 5 of the notes, those notes were for May 2025 examination, which means they were updated for till 31st October 2024. So the next 4 months amendment, that is November, December, Jan and Feb, is what we are going to cover in this particular video. If you want a book which covers all these amendments up to date, then you can go with version 6 of the handwritten notes that are already available on the FAST website. However, if you wish to continue with your old book, no problem, you can download this PDF from the Telegram channel. The link is already shared in the description of the video, and make the relevant changes on the relevant pages. However, the amendment PDF is almost of 50-55 pages, and the time left for September 25 examination is too less. I would advise you to not waste time in making corrections and rather going for the new book. However, if you are very much comfortable with your old book, you can definitely continue with the same. Now, apart from amendments, there are some other things also that I have changed in version 6 of the book just to make the book look better. It's about the presentation, the handwriting, the flow. So certain chapters like assessment, audit, inspection, where even if there are no major amendments, but still I have redrafted the entire chapter. So the new revisions that we will be taking on YouTube is going to be from version 6 of the book only. So it might happen that even if there's no amendment, you have studied from version 5, you're comfortable, it's okay. But if you are thinking that no, I'm going to go with the new revision videos that will come, then in that case you should get version 6, because then the revision and your book is exactly going to match. Because there are no amendments in these particular areas, I have not put it in the amendment sheet as such, because amendment sheet only covers the areas where there are amendments. This is something that we have changed in our book for better handwriting, presentation, some small changes in tables, pictures, charts here and there, etc. The full page that contains amendment in version 6, I have cut pasted in this particular PDF. So everything that is written in this green font notifies that this is an amendment which has come after 31st October till 28 February, applicable for September 2025 examination. Yes, ma'am. Also, if you are using version 5, please make sure to check the corrigendum that I had already shared at the time of May 25 examination on the Telegram and YouTube. Yes, ma'am. So this was all about the introduction, that if your exams are in September, till 28 Feb 2025, amendments are applicable to you. How to get these amendments, how to get the updated book, everything done. In fact, your question bank also has some major amendments this time. So I have shared full PDF of version 6 of the question bank for free on Telegram channel. You can download that also. If you wish to continue with version 5, you can make relevant changes. The changes sheet is also already shared on Telegram. Right, ma'am. So starting with first chapter, which is GST in India and introduction. Very small change in the area of taxes not subsumed in GST. Now, ma'am, we all know alcoholic liquor for human consumption. Alcoholic liquor for human consumption is outside the purview of GST. The charging section, section 9, also puts it out of the taxability. Now here few more things are added along with alcohol, and they are unnatured, extra neutral alcohol, rectified spirit for manufacture of alcoholic liquor for human consumption. So this extra neutral alcohol or these spirits that are used to manufacture alcohol, now these spirits are also kept outside the purview of GST. So earlier it was only the full prepared ready to drink alcohol which was outside GST. But now even the unnatured, denatured, extra neutral alcohol or the spirits that are used to manufacture the alcohol, they are also outside the purview of GST, and the earlier taxes like excise and VAT remain to be applicable on them. So this is a very small amendment, not that important for examination. Right, ma'am. Moving on to next chapter, which is supply under GST. Now, supply under GST, first amendment is in section 7.2, which is supply excludes. Ma'am, 7.1 says supply includes. 7.2 says supply excludes. We study a negative list in this, that is schedule 3, FB changes. Things that might be goods or services, but still particularly they are kept outside the purview of GST. They are given in the schedule 3 negative list. So we have two new entries added in schedule 3. FB changes the C part, that was court tribunal. With C, now two new more C's added, which qualify as not supply, even though you might think that they are supply of services. Both are related to insurance only. The first point says that apportionment of co-insurance premium by the lead insurer to the co-insurer for jointly supplied insurance services in co-insurance agreements, subject to condition that lead insurer pays CSUI, GST, whatever is applicable on entire premium paid by insured. What they are saying, let us say there is this Mr. A who got a property insured. The insurance is worth 50 crore. Now, it might be possible that two or more insurance companies come together and jointly provide the policy to Mr. A. So, let us say we have X insurance company and Y insurance company. Both of them have together insured this particular building in the ratio of, let's say, 40% is to 60%. Let's assume Y is the lead insurer. Always whenever there is a joint insurance agreement, one insurance company acts as a lead insurer, which collects the entire premium from the ultimate customer, and then whatever apportionment is required to be done is done among the insurance companies by this lead insurer person only. So let us say Mr. A paid some X rupees of premium. Now this insurance company Y will collect GST on this entire amount and pay it to government. Then later on, this will be apportioned between X and Y in the ratio of 40:60. So here government is saying that at the time of collecting premium, if Y insurance company has already collected GST on this full premium that is required to be paid by the insured person, then in that case, later on when you are apportioning to your co-insurers, at that time you are not required to pay GST again. This apportionment between the joint insurers, provided the condition that already on gross amount full premium is paid, is now a part of negative list, which means it is no more a supply under GST, hence no GST will be applicable. And now we read it again. Apportionment of co-insurance premium by the lead insurer to the co-insurer for jointly supplied insurance services in co-insurance agreement, subject to the condition that lead insurer has already paid GST on the entire premium. Then in that case, when you apportion this premium, you don't have to pay GST again. Right, ma'am. And the next entry that is added in schedule 3 says that services by insurer to reinsurer. Now understand the difference between co-insurance and reinsurance. Co-insurance means X and Y insurance company together jointly have given the insurance policy to Mr. A. Whereas, what is reinsurance, ma'am? This is co-insurance. What is the meaning of reinsurance? Reinsurance says that X insurance company only entered into contract with Mr. A to provide the insurance policy. But then later on, X insurance company was also scared that, oh my God, what if claim arises, I should also get insured. And then X insurance company gets a reinsurance from Y insurance company. Now in this case, the premium is transferred to Y insurance company. But understand, whenever an insurance policy is issued, there is a lot of background check that has to be done. So the insurance company will do a survey, do some background checks, ask a lot of information from you, and then they will take help of actuaries, etc., and determine what exact premium should be collected from you. Which means they have to do some work They have insurance agents. They pay commission to agents to get insurance related work. They have to work hard, right? But why insurance company? Did it work? No, ma'am. It was just sitting, and X insurance company did all the work, all the background checks, came to Y insurance and simply gave them the business of insurance. So for this service, the normal a normal thing that is applicable in market is that this reinsurance company gives some commission to the ex insurance company because they brought business for the reinsurance company. Now the point here says that whenever whenever there is a contract of reinsurance, the services by insurer to reinsurer. What are the services by insurer to reinsurer, ma'am? The insurer X company provided business to Y insurance company while Y was simply sitting in its office, which means, ma'am, it is kind of a service. Yes, ma'am. For which the reinsurance company normally pays a commission, which is known as ceding commission or reinsurance commission. Now they are saying that let us say we collected 100 rupees from Mr. A. We collected 100 rupees from Mr. A as premium. We transferred it to Y insurance company because we entered into a contract of reinsurance. But what we did is we actually transferred 80 only. We actually transferred 80 only. Why, ma'am? Because even if we give 100, Y is going to give us 20 back as ceding commission. So the question here is that this 20 worth of ceding commission, should GST be charged on it? The answer is no. Provided that on the entire gross premium that you have to pay to your reinsurer, if you have paid GST, then whatever ceding commission you receive from your reinsurer, you don't have to pay GST on the same again. We read it very slowly and you understand. The services by insurer to reinsurer. What are the services, ma'am? We are bringing business for reinsurers, for which ceding commission or reinsurance commission is deducted from reinsurance premium. So let us say X insurance company had to pay a reinsurance premium of 100 rupees to Y insurance company because Y is providing insurance services to X. But instead of paying 100, we paid only 90. Why, ma'am? Because 10 was the ceding commission that Y gave to X for bringing business. Now they are saying that if GST is paid on entire 100 rupees, then this 10 worth of ceding commission that Y is giving to X, you don't have to pay GST on the same again. So if this ceding commission is deducted from reinsurance premium paid by insurer to reinsurer, subject to condition that GST paid by reinsurer on gross reinsurance premium already, then in that case inclusive of ceding commission. So this 100 was inclusive of ceding commission that I got. Out of 100, I gave 10 again. So if I have already paid GST on entire 100 of the reinsurance premium, I don't need to pay on the 10 that I am giving as ceding commission to the X insurance company. In the RTP of September 2025, we have a question about this amendment of Schedule 3. So we will see it simultaneously only. So if you come to RTP September 2025, question number 17. See, question number 17. Very, very simple question. You understand the applicability of the amendment Schedule 3. Yes, ma'am. ABC Insurance Limited, a registered insurer in Maharashtra, is engaged in providing insurance services. During the current financial year, the company entered into following transactions. ABC Insurance Limited enters into a co-insurance agreement with XYZ, which means ABC and XYZ are together going to give insurance services. Whereas ABC Insurance Limited is the lead insurer. So ABC will be collecting the full premium from the policy holder. The insured, Gayatri Industries, pays a total premium of 50 lakh rupees, which is apportioned by the lead insurer ABC between itself and XYZ in the ratio of 60:40 for the insurance services jointly supplied. You have to explain the taxability of the same. So do we understand that, ma'am, while collecting premium from Gayatri, If ABC has already discharged full GST on 50 lakh rupees, then in that case, whenever this 60-40 apportionment is done between ABC and XYZ, GST need not be paid again because it is not a supply only. GST paid on full 50 lakh rupees, and therefore no, this apportionment is not a supply between ABC and XYZ. GST will not be paid again. Right, ma'am. Second point, a large industrial plant needs an insurance worth 500 crore rupees. It approaches ABC Insurance Limited for the same. However, ABC is unable to underwrite the entire risk alone. It enters into a reinsurance agreement with reinsurer PQR. ABC pays a reinsurance premium of 20 lakh to PQR Limited. This allows ABC Insurance Limited to manage its risk and financial exposure. So we charged 50 lakh from the customer, but we are not reinsuring everything. We are reinsuring a part of the policy. So therefore 20 lakh we are paying to the reinsurance company. This allows ABC to manage its risk. While paying this amount to PQR, ABC Insurance Limited deducts a ceding commission of 1 lakh rupees, which is charged for the services. So what happened is that the customer gave you 50 lakh rupees as the full insurance premium. You are ABC. However, you are not able to cover the risk fully. You are also scared. Therefore, you are taking insurance of insurance. So you went to PQR. Now, you did not reinsure everything. You reinsured a part, that is 20 lakh. So, on 20 lakh that you are giving to PQR, you have already paid GST because you yourself are taking an insurance policy from PQR. You understand the difference between joint insurance and reinsurance. In joint insurance, what we are saying is two people together giving the insurance policy. Hence, at the time of apportionment, no GST. Here, ABC has solely individually entered into a contract with customer. Therefore, GST discharged on full 50 lakh. Now, ABC itself is taking insurance from PQR and transferring 20 lakh. Therefore, GST again required to be paid on 20 lakh as the premium charged by PQR from ABC. However, now they are saying that PQR is giving 1 lakh rupees to ABC as ceding commission because ABC brought business for PQR. Here we are going to say that when ABC is deducting this ceding commission, they might directly pay 19 lakh only, but still GST will be paid on 20 lakh, and on this 1 lakh again GST not required to be paid. So here we are saying that services by ABC to PQR for which the ceding commission is deducted from reinsurance premium will not be liable to GST because on the entire gross amount the GST is already paid. So very simple, you have to understand, for the apportionment of co-insurance premium and for the ceding commission or reinsurance commission deducted, no GST will be applicable. Right, ma'am. After that, done with the Schedule 3 amendment. Then in the liquidated damages part, we add one clarification which says that penal charges levied by regulated entities like banks and NBFCs as per RBI directions for non-compliance with loan terms are in nature of liquidated damages, and therefore no GST will be payable on the same. See, understand, if a bank or an NBFC is giving you loan, their full intention is to receive the loan amount back. Of course, they will never be wanting you to default. Still, if you default, you cause them harm, you cause them injury. And making good of losses for someone or providing for injury is in the nature of liquidated damages, and liquidated damages are not taxable under GST. So they are simply explaining that earlier we used to call these amounts as penal interest, but now as per RBI directions we call them as penal charges. So just because they are called charges, will they be liable to GST? The answer is no. Ultimately, you are defaulting on some points that are mentioned in your loan agreement, which means you are causing an injury to the bank or NBFC. Now, if any penal charges you are required to pay, which earlier were called as penal interest only. When you take a loan, you pay interest. Interest is also anyways exempt. So, with interest, penal interest was also anyways exempt. But now, just because we are calling them charges, Will they become taxable? The answer is no. Name doesn't matter, ma'am. The ultimate intention is that only that we have defaulted on the loan repayment provisions. We have non-complied with the terms and therefore we are paying these amounts. They are liquidated damages and no GST will be applicable. However, you understand external commercial borrowings or credit cards or trade credits, their separate provisions apply. In fact, credit card interest is also taxable. If you remember the exemption entries that we had studied, that all interests are exempt but credit card interests are taxable. So these things are like separate kind of agreements. These are structured obligations where separate product specific direction is going to apply. But generally for any regulated entity giving loan to someone, as per RBI directions, if they collect penal charges, those charges are not leviable to GST. This simple thing you have to remember. I believe it might come as an adjustment in some big question. Right, ma'am. And then the last amendment for the chapter supply under GST is treatment of vouchers. Now this is important for your examination. Also, if you understand it in one go, you will enjoy. Otherwise, you might have to listen to it 2 to 3 times. So understand, ma'am, voucher. Now, first of all, they are explaining what is a voucher. Voucher should come under what, ma'am? Is voucher money? Is voucher actionable claim? What exactly is voucher as a document? So we say that if there are some prepaid vouchers which are recognized by Reserve Bank of India, they might fall within the scope of money. We have studied the definition of money in the chapter of important terms. Now, money says that anything that is recognized by RBI as a medium of transaction, as a medium of exchange, we call it as money. So, ma'am, if there are some vouchers which are prepaid, we can now accept them as money only. You can give the voucher to someone and get whatever you want. So in that case, they are in essence used as money only. Right, ma'am. So these prepaid vouchers which are recognized by RBI might fall within the scope of money. And if there are some other vouchers, let's say not prepaid vouchers, but they are vouchers which create a kind of an obligation on supplier, that if this voucher is given to supplier, the supplier will have to accept the voucher and give the desired goods and services in exchange of these particular vouchers. Which means, ma'am, voucher is going to be redeemed or not redeemed, we are not sure. It is still contingent. But if the liability arises, then yes, the supplier will have to give the goods or services. Is this some kind of a actionable claim? Yes, ma'am. That the happening or non-happening is uncertain. But if it happens, the civil court also recognizes these claims. So we might consider them as actionable claim. When there are some other types of vouchers which create obligation on supplier to receive them as consideration. Ma'am, in both the situations, be it money or be it actionable claim, GST cannot apply. Why, ma'am? Because Schedule 3 particularly says that no actionable claim will be taxable except for specified actionable claims which are lottery, betting, gambling, online money gaming, horse racing and casino. Only lottery, betting, gambling, online money gaming, horse racing and casino, ma'am, these 6 specified actionable claims are taxable under GST. Other than these, any actionable claim, GST not applicable. And money to we already know, ma'am. Money to we already know it is neither goods nor services, and therefore they are simply saying these transactions in voucher are not supply under GST. However, this line is extremely important. The underlying goods and services may be taxable. Now understand this difference very clearly here. When you will study the chapter of time of supply or value of supply, you will see that vouchers are taxable at their redemption value. For time of supply, you will see vouchers identifiable, then at the time of issue, not identifiable at the time of redemption. And there might be a doubt arising in your mind, which says that, ma'am, if vouchers are not taxable only because they are either money or actionable claim, why are we even determining the time and value of vouchers? So here lies the explanation that vouchers themselves are not taxable, but the goods or services that are underlying, that are supplied against those vouchers are taxable under GST. Which means, ma'am, I am a customer. I purchase a voucher from Amazon and later on redeem it to purchase some goods from Amazon. That voucher is going to be taxable for me. But understand, if there are some distributors, agents, or sub distributors who are purely dealing in vouchers only. They purchase voucher, they sell voucher to the ultimate customer. Like people enter into contract with big companies that we will sell 1,000 or 10,000 vouchers for you. You give us some commission on this. Or let us say the voucher is worth 7,000. The company gives it them for 5,000 only and then they later on give it to customer. We are saying for these people who are only dealing in vouchers, either they are trading in vouchers or the company gives the voucher to customers but they charge some commission. There we are going to understand the GST treatment separately. As a customer, you yourself enter into a contract with the company, get the vouchers, they are still taxable. I'll give you a simple example. Let us say you think voucher is equivalent to money. Okay, I give you money, you give me money. No GST will be applicable. I give you money and you give me these spectacles. Will GST apply on the spectacles? The answer is yes, ma'am. So if voucher you think as money, I give you voucher, you give me money because we are dealing in voucher only. So voucher also money, what you give me is money, money, no GST applicable. I give you voucher and you give me some goods or services in return. So think of voucher as money. Normally, just like you give money and you buy spectacles, GST applicable. If you give voucher and you buy spectacles, will GST be applicable? Very yes, ma'am. The answer is yes. So here we are saying that if there are some distributors or sub distributors or agents who on principal to principal basis trade vouchers, they are trading vouchers, then we say that GST is not applicable. However, ma'am, the company itself gives the vouchers to the customers and I am an agent, a person charging commission from the company because I am helping them to sell these vouchers, then commission in itself is a taxable item under GST, right? Now, you're not trading in vouchers. Think of it as shares. Ma'am, trading in shares, GST doesn't apply. But the broker who facilitates the transaction in shares, GST is applicable on commission charged by him. So, similar thing. If you trade in vouchers, GST not applicable. But when these vouchers are distributed on commission or fees basis and you charge a commission to facilitate the transaction of voucher, in that case, of course, on your commission or fees, GST is going to be applicable. You simply think of it at par with money or actionable claim and automatically the concepts will get clear to you. So it is not that vouchers are not taxable. If the voucher gives you some goods or services against it, of course the transaction will be taxable. But if there is pure trading of vouchers, then just like money for money, GST not applicable, simply pure trading of vouchers, GST is not applicable. If there is any service fees, affiliate charges, any other amount for supply, additional services charged, on all these kinds of commission fees, charges, etc., GST is very well applicable. And if there are any unredeemed vouchers left, let us say the company gave the voucher to a trader. The trader was unable to sell the voucher further to any customer and the voucher expired. It is called as breakage or leakage. No problem, no supply ever happened and therefore no GST will ever be applicable on such leaked or broken vouchers. Right, ma'am. So this is the whole clarification with respect to treatment of vouchers. So vouchers, if they are prepaid recognized by RBI, can be treated like money. Others can be treated as actionable claims because they create an obligation. And therefore, if you simply trade in them, GST not applicable. But if you facilitate transaction, charge commission fees, GST applicable. On underlying goods services that you get against the vouchers, yes, GST is applicable on the same. Is it clear to everyone? Yes, ma'am. Chalo. Then moving on to next chapter, which is charge of GST. Now, ma'am, charge of GST, section 9. That is charging section. We've already understood this part in the introduction chapter only. The same corresponding amendment is done here also. So, ma'am, section 9 of CGST Act and Section 5 of IGST Act, which are the charging sections, had a line saying that GST applicable on all goods services except alcoholic liquor for human consumption. Now, in the except part, you add along with alcohol, the unnatured extra neutral alcohol rectified spirit used for manufacturing of alcohol. So not just the prepared ready to drink alcohol, but also the spirits or the unnatured alcohol used for manufacture of alcohol are also now outside the scope of GST. This we have already done. Then moving on to the amendments in reverse charge mechanism. The first amendment is with respect to services of sponsorship. What was the earlier provision? Ma'am, any person providing sponsorship services to a body corporate or partnership firm used to be taxable under reverse charge mechanism. Now the amendment says that any person other than body corporate, which means ma'am, if the supplier of sponsorship services, the person collecting the money for sponsorship is a body corporate, in that case we will say GST will be applicable on forward charge mechanism. Let's take some examples. A Limited provided sponsorship services to X Limited. Mr. A provided sponsorship services to X Limited. X Limited provided sponsorship services to ABC partnership firm. PQR partnership firm provided sponsorship services to Mr. B, and let us say ABC partnership firm provided services to XYZ partnership firm. Okay, so these examples you have to tell me whether RCM or FCM applicable. First condition that you see is the supplier of sponsorship company has to be a person other than body corporate. Body corporate means, ma'am, a company or a corporation, a limited company that has a separate legal identity. Yes, ma'am. So if my supplier is a body corporate, close your eyes, don't even look at the recipient. It is going to be taxable under forward charge. So, ma'am, two situations here. Supplier is a body corporate. You forget the recipient. Forget the recipient. Supplier is a body corporate in point number 1 and 3. Therefore, I will simply say forward charge mechanism applies. Now, the remaining 3 points, ma'am, supplier is either a partnership firm or an individual, but not a body corporate. So, now I am going to look at the recipient. The recipient has to be either body corporate or partnership firm for RCM to apply. Ma'am, here supplier is not body corporate, recipient is body corporate, and hence I will say RCM is going to apply. Similarly, ma'am, supplier is not body corporate, recipient is also neither body corporate nor partnership firm because recipient is an individual. So the recipient part condition not satisfied. Therefore, I will say forward charge mechanism is going to apply. But the last part says that supplier is not a body corporate, it's a partnership firm. The recipient is a partnership firm and therefore supplier condition also fulfilled, recipient condition also fulfilled, and hence I will say that this sponsorship transaction is going to be taxable under reverse charge mechanism. So earlier it was any person to partnership firm or body corporate, but now it is any person other than body corporate to partnership firm or body corporate, all the conditions simultaneously satisfied. Then we will say GST is going to apply on the reverse charge mechanism basis. Pause the video, note down these amendments for once because of amendment there are very high chances to see this adjustment in exam, and also in your question bank some questions will change because of this, because sponsorship is a very common adjustment in ITC and RCM chapter. So please make sure you are using an updated question bank. Done? Yes, ma'am. Then next amendment is in renting of commercial properties. Before explaining you the amendment, I'll just brief you out with what was the earlier provision that was applicable. So, ma'am, renting, you forget government renting. We're talking about normal renting. Can be, ma'am, of residential properties and what we call them as other than residential properties. In layman term, we can call it as commercial also. Right, ma'am. So, for residential properties, supplier can be any person. If recipient is unregistered, it is exempt. If recipient is registered and taking for personal purposes, then also exempt. But if recipient is registered and taking residential property, residential purpose, something related to business like company taking for director or a partnership firm taking for employee, etc. In that case, RCM applies. This provision was there already, still remains intact, no change here. Talking about other than residential properties, here we say you check the supplier first. If your supplier is a registered person, your recipient can be anyone, registered, unregistered, compo, anyone. Always forward charge mechanism will apply. Because commercial properties in essence should be taxable only. Think of a packet of chips, ma'am. Chips, if the supplier is registered, the recipient could be registered also, unregistered also, it doesn't matter to him, no. The supplier always collects GST on FCM. Same case applicable here for commercial renting. In essence, commercial renting should be taxable only. And therefore, if the supplier is registered, of course, he will collect GST from each and every customer, be it registered or unregistered under forward charge mechanism. But ma'am, if the supplier is unregistered and giving commercial properties on rent for to unregistered people only, then there is no GST applicable because supplier also unregistered, recipient also unregistered, no RCM liability on anyone, no FCM liability on anyone. But if the supplier is a registered person, in that case, government had in last attempt come out with a notification saying that RCM is applicable. For May 2025 examination, this was the amendment that if URP is giving commercial properties on rent to RP, RCM will apply. Now this time they have introduced a slight new amendment here saying that all registered person other than composition person. So you say that if an unregistered person gives property on rent to a composition taxable person under section 10, yes, they are also registered people, but still no GST is going to apply here, RCM will not apply, which means ma'am, all the other registered persons other than composition will be paying RCM but not the composition person. Only for RCM commercial renting entry, only for this point we treat composition at par with unregistered and not with registered. Otherwise normally ma'am, composition people are treated at par with registered person only. So this small amendment says that ma'am, renting of any property other than residential. Other than residential means commercial ma'am. By any URP to RP, RCM is applicable, but other than composition person. So RP to any person, FCM. URP to RP other than compo, RCM. But URP to URP or compo, it is outside the scope of GST. Done ma'am, understood. If you want, you can note down this chart. It is with respect to renting of both residential as well as other than residential properties. Done guys? Yes ma'am. After that ma'am, a very small clarification introduced in section 9.5. What was 9.5 ma'am? Hattere services, the hater services as we call them in English batch. Housekeeping, accommodation, transportation and restaurant. For these 4 services, e-commerce operator collects GST and pays to government. That was section 9.5. Now this thing we have already studied. It was not even required to be clarified, but still government clarified it, made the language better. We already know this. Okay ma'am, so we'll just give a good read. If you are using version 5, then also these things were mentioned in some different language. In version 6, I have made it as the same language of the new clarification and hence it is given in green. So they are saying that for all the 4 services, that is housekeeping, accommodation, transportation and restaurant, the supplies made through ECO included in aggregate turnover of supplier and not in the aggregate turnover of e-commerce operator. Do we already know this? Yes ma'am. Today let us say there is a restaurant named City Corner from where Riddhi purchased pav bhaji via Zomato. Let us say ma'am, the pav bhaji is of 270 rupees. 270 rupees pav bhaji it is ma'am. Whose purchase is 270 rupees? Riddhi's purchase ma'am. Whose sale it is? City Corners sale it is. No ma'am. In City Corners P&L, trading P&L, it will show as sales. It is their aggregate turnover, not Zomato's. Zomato is simply liable to collect GST from Riddhi on 270 and pay it to government. Zomato will not record it in its book as either purchase or sale. Then what is Zomato's sale, ma'am? The commission, the platform fees that Zomato charges. Yes, ma'am. The entire amount of pav bhaji is of course not Zomato's turnover. So here we say, ma'am, that the supplies made through e-commerce operator are added in the aggregate turnover of supplier, not e-commerce operator. Also, it is not even treated as purchase, inward supply of eco. It is neither sale nor purchase for eco, and hence eco need not discharge any RCM liabilities on the same, because RCM is always required to be paid by the recipient. ECO is not recipient, so no RCM, no need to reverse any ITC, no need to apportion ITC, because you understand, normally if I purchase food, it is blocked under section 17.5. So I might have to reverse my ITC, I might have to do rule 42 43 reversals also if I am purchasing any blocked credit item. But government is clarifying this thing that Zomato, you don't worry, the recipient will look after it. You as Zomato or Urban Clap or Ola or Uber or Oyo or Trivago, all these e-commerce operators under section 9.5, you guys are not making any sale, any purchase as per 9.5. You are just liable to collect GST and pay to government, and hence you don't have to pay any RCM, you don't have to do any reversals. All these things will be done by recipient. You just collect GST and pay it to government. Right, ma'am. So here we complete all the amendments of supply and charge. Now moving on to composition levy, very small amendment here it is. See, there was this section which said that if you are ineligible but you still opt for composition scheme, proper officer can issue you a show cause notice and kick you out of composition scheme. In that case, whatever demand arises on you will be determined according to section 73-74. Demands and recovery chapter. But now there's a major amendment in demand and recovery chapter where section 73-74 applicability is restricted only up to cases till FY 2023-24. All the cases that will now be taken into consideration post 23-24 financial year will be now dealt with according to section 74A. So all the new show cause notices now or the order now issued for any demand order will come under section 74A. So simply, if you have done anything till FY 23-24, notice will come under 73-74. After that, notice will come under 74A. So in entire book, wherever you see the references that liability will be determined according to 73-74, according to 73-74, everywhere you have to make a slash and also insert 74A. Almost at 10-15 places in the book, you will have to make this adjustment, because whatever you do, no, any type of fraud you do, any kind of mistake you do, always liability is determined according to 73-74 only, the demand provisions. And there, because a new section is now inserted, so all the references you have to add this new section, that is 74A. This very small and simple amendment. Now moving further, let's start with the amendments of registration under GST. Very simple procedural kind of amendment in Rule 8 and Rule 9. Now if you remember, there was a provision which used to say that if you are opting for Aadhaar authentication and you are identified on that data analysis or risk parameter basis that you're a risky person, the officer can even physically call you, take your photographs, do your biometric based Aadhaar authentication, call for original documents from you. Yes, ma'am. Now government has simply issued a notification saying that this similar procedure of verifying and taking photographs will also be applicable even if the person is not opting for Aadhaar authentication. So let's say you are not opting for Aadhaar authentication. In that case, you get registration on the basis of physical verification or some other documents. In that situation also, the officer can similarly call you at the office, do your biometric based authentication, take your photograph and they can call for the original documents also from you to verify whether whatever you have filed on the portal while applying is correct or not. So the similar procedure, not authentication, sorry, because we are not opting for authentication. So other than biometric based authentication, rest all other things will be commonly now applicable here also. So the similar procedure of taking the photograph and then verification of original documents at one of the notified centers, even now applicable for people who are not opting for Aadhaar authentication. Because earlier this procedure was only for people who are opting for Aadhaar authentication. And once you finish off this verification, provide the original documents and everything, after that only your application will be considered as deemed filed. So the application shall be deemed completed only upon this such kind of successful verification. Right, ma'am? And one amendment which will completely make your life unaffected is in section 30, which says that whenever your registration is cancelled and later on there is revocation, in that case the officer may put some conditions or restrictions on you at the time of revocation. Ma'am, have they prescribed any condition as such till date? No. In future they can, yes. So this is just an empowering kind of a clause inserted here saying that whenever the officer is giving you revocation, they might put some conditions or some restrictions on you that we are giving revocation, but you have to follow this, that. So as prescribed, you will have to follow them. Is anything prescribed yet? The answer is no. So even if you skip this, cancel this, doesn't matter for examination. Then moving on to next chapter, which is tax invoice credit and debit note. Very small amendment in case of self-invoicing. Ma'am, where is self-invoicing applicable? Where an unregistered person supplies certain goods services to a registered person and the registered person is required to pay reverse charge mechanism under section 9(3) or section 9(4). In that case, because the supplier being an unregistered person cannot issue a tax invoice, the recipient is still liable to pay tax and hence the recipient is going to issue a document known as self-invoicing. So here they are saying that whenever a registered person is liable to pay tax under section 9(3) or 9(4), both the sections pertain to reverse charge mechanism. So they have inserted a time limit here via amendment saying that within a period of 30 days, within a period of 30 days, the day on which you receive the goods, services or both from an unregistered supplier, from there within 30 days, the recipient being a registered person will be issuing a self-invoicing, including a supplier registered solely for the people who are registered only for the TDS purpose, those government people who only take registration for TDS purpose. These people also will be required to comply with the provisions. So a registered person liable to pay tax under 9(3), 9(4) shall within a period of 30 days issue invoice in respect of goods, services or both received by him from unregistered supplier, including supplier registered solely for the purpose of TDS under section 51 from the date of receipt of goods, services or both. So the day on which you receive the goods, services or both, from there within 30 days, you being a registered person taking goods, services from unregistered person, you will be issuing self-invoicing. Right, ma'am. Ma'am, what if the recipient is registered? Then to in that case, what if the supplier is registered? If the supplier is registered, then supplier will only issue a normal invoice. No, RCM invoice can be issued by supplier also, no problem if he is registered. But an unregistered person cannot issue invoice, and in that case, RCM liability may arise on recipient. Then recipient will be doing self-invoicing within 30 days of receipt of goods, services or both. Only one simple amendment? Yes, ma'am. Then moving on to next chapter, which is time of supply. Amendment in section 13(3). What is section 13(3), ma'am? Time of supply in case of reverse charge mechanism for services. Section 12 is for goods, section 13 is for services. 13(1) simply says liability to pay arises. 13(2) is forward charge mechanism. And 13(3) is reverse charge mechanism. So earlier the provision was date of payment or 61st day from the date whenever supplier issues a document. But now they have inserted one more timeline, and earlier of all three you have to consider. So the timeline that was there earlier still remains. That is date of payment or day following 60th day from the date of invoice or any document issued by supplier. Day following 60th day simply means 61st day. Or ma'am, let us say if there is a case when the recipient is issuing invoices, ma'am, because this is RCM, so of course a URP can supply services to RP and the RCM provisions may apply like GTA, legal services or many more etc. that we've studied. So in that case, ma'am, if the supplier is not issuing any document, the recipient will be issuing. If supplier is issuing, you take 61st day from supplier's invoice date. If supplier is not issuing, then recipient will issue, ma'am. Generally, we just now saw recipient will be issuing within 30 days. So, whenever the recipient issues, take exactly that date only. So, payment date if required, not all the time. So, it is not that you get all three conditions all the time. If supplier issues invoice, you take supplier's invoice date plus 61 days. But if supplier is not issuing, recipient will issue. So you simply take the self-invoicing date itself only, and whichever is earlier becomes your time of supply. Once again, earlier it was date of payment or 61st day from supplier's document. Now it is date of payment, 61st day from supplier's document, or when invoice issued by recipient himself, wherever required, whichever is earlier becomes your time of supply. Right, ma'am. And if none of the three clauses available, then of course, whenever recipient makes the purchase or the expense entry in the book, that only becomes the time of supply for RCM services. So this very small amendment in time of supply chapter, but the probability of this being asked examination is high. Okay, ma'am. Moving to next chapter, which is place of supply. Place of supply simply says that for all the services supplied to URP over any digital or electronic network, it is mandatory to record the state of recipient on invoice, and that only becomes the place of supply. Earlier, 1 or 2 attempts back only, there was an amendment added in tax invoice chapter, which said that whenever you are supplying anything to an unregistered person over any e-commerce platform or any digital platform, it is important to note the address of recipient. Now, address means not the full address, just the name of the state. So, correspondingly, amendment is made here also in place of supply chapter, saying that that same state is going to become the place of supply. So, whenever you purchase anything or you avail any service from any electronic network, any e-commerce operator platform, see, in that situation, you will have to give your state name at least for the tax invoice purpose, that is recorded on the tax invoice, because it is a mandatory requirement according to tax invoice chapter. And your corresponding thing says that that same state recorded on invoice, of course, becomes the place of supply. So this small clarification is inserted here. For all the services supplied to URP over a digital or electronic network, it is mandatory to record state of recipient on tax invoice, and that only becomes the place of supply. Right, ma'am. Now starting with the next chapter, that is exemptions from GST. Here a new section is introduced. Earlier what we used to study is 1 balle balle, 1 balle balle. Why balle balle, ma'am? Because we have got exemption from GST. Section 11 stays, and now they have inserted a new section, which is section 11A. Now this says that notwithstanding anything contained in this act, so section 11A overrides entire GST act. If a practice was or is generally prevalent regarding levy or non-levy of tax on supply of goods, services, or both, and if such supplies were or are liable to tax or higher tax, the government has power that on recommendation of council, they can lower the tax or they can even remove the tax. Ma'am, what are you trying to say here? Arbitrary example I am taking and trying to explain you. So let us say, ma'am, it was and it is a very general practice even today was there that we do not levy taxes on milk or salt, etc. They are very essential commodities. Or let us say, ma'am, since years it has been a practice that on some particular items only very small amount of tax is being levied. Now let us say, as per the act or as per the GST law, because of some reason taxes have started to being levied on those items. Let us say, arbitrary example I am saying, there's an entry in HSN code which says that anything that contains iodine will be taxable at 12% GST. Now, salt contains iodine, which means because of that HSN code entry, 12% GST started to levy on salt. So here government is saying that just because of some reason, if higher taxes are levied on particular items, or in general taxes are only levied on particular items on which, as per a very general and common practice which is prevalent amongst people, we don't levy or we levy very less taxes, then on these particular items, even overriding the act, government can come out with a notification saying that okay, we understand on these things nobody have been paying tax since years, or they are paying very less taxes. So yes, we also reduce your tax, or we completely exempt your tax on those particular items. So government may, on recommendation of council, direct such tax to not required to be paid. Why? Because for levy or non-levy, there was a practice prevalent amongst people, or such supplies now are liable to taxes or higher taxes, then of course we can either make the tax zero or lower the tax according to the general practices, which means, ma'am, this is just an empowering section that government can anytime use and issue notifications. Right, ma'am. Then in the education block, there is this one line added. Now, see, there were a lot of government schemes already exempt. Like we had this Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gramin Kaushalya Yojana, some skill development yojanas, National Council for Vocational Education Training, whatever programs they organize, the awarding body, the training body, the assessment body, which is recognized by the National Council, all of those. Now, one more point is added here, that or a training partner approved by the National Skill Development Corporation. So if any partner, any training partner who is approved by this government body of Skill Development Corporation is arranging any activity with respect to skill or vocation or qualification course, that training programs will also be exempt under GST. So it is just one more point added to the exemption entry of education. There were already the Skill Development Corporation, whatever they organize, National Council for Vocational Education, whatever they organize, the assessing body, the training body, the awarding body. Now they've added one more, that if you are a training partner who is approved by National Skill Development Corporation, then you also develop organizing any skill, vocation or qualification course, GST is going to be exempt on whatever you charge as fees from the students. Right, ma'am. Then in the insurance block, also similar situation. We had a lot of insurance policies already which were exempt under GST, like Jan Arogya Yojana, then tribal insurance, hut insurance, accident insurance, or Fasal Bima Yojana, etc., etc. One more government has added here, that insurance by motor vehicle accident fund against contribution made by insurers out of premiums collected for third party insurance of motor vehicles. If you heard about these third party insurances, that if in case we are driving and we hit someone, to cover the expenses of that person, because if you hit someone, of course that person will be asking for medical expenses from you only. So let us say you hit someone, and to provide money to that person you take an insurance. Those are third party insurances. So if these third party insurances are done by the motor vehicle accident fund against contribution made by insurers out of premium collected for third party insurances of motor vehicles, these kind of policies are also exempt under GST. So there's this one more kind of insurance added along with all the entries that were already existing. Right, ma'am. Then we have this up to 2000 rupees transaction charges. So up to 2000 transactions, if you do, whatever the bank charges, etc., they are waived by the government. They are not, means the GST on charges is exempt. Now this exemption is also available to RBI regulated account aggregators. Have you heard about account aggregators? Who are these people known as account aggregators? One very common example that you might have heard of is Razorpay. If you've heard Razorpay, whenever you order online from some website, they will, at the time of payment, they will redirect you to the Razorpay. Now, what is that, ma'am? These people are known as payment aggregators. What they simply do is collect the money from customer. It is their responsibility to collect the money from customer, keep it in escrow account, and then later on give everything together to the suppliers. Basically, aggregate means to collect, right? So they collect money from a lot of people on behalf of supplier. charge some commission, some fees, keep it in an escrow account till they actually give the amount to the supplier, and then ultimately forward the entire amount to the supplier. So of course, for doing these kind of activities, they do charge some kind of a fees or charge. So if the transactions are up to 2000 rupees, then whatever fees or charges they are collecting, no GST will be applicable on the same. GST is exempt on such kind of transaction charges. But this exemption is available only to payment aggregators and not to payment gateways. See, understand there's a difference. If the question in exam mentions the word payment gateway, you make the transaction charges taxable. But if they say payment aggregator, that too up to 2000 rupees transaction, then exemption will be given. One simple difference is the gateway only facilitates the payment. Payment flows from customer to supplier only through the gateway. But aggregator will collect the money from customer, keep it with them in an escrow account, and then give that money to supplier. So this is the difference. To gateways, exemption is not available, but to payment aggregators, the exemption is available. Right, ma'am. Then last 2 points as such are not very important. They are just clarification in nature, that is Delhi Development Authority a local authority? Simply, is Delhi Development Authority a local authority is what they are asking. The answer is no. So all the exemptions that are applicable in general to a local authority would not be applicable to Delhi Development Authority. Local authority, what is a local authority, ma'am? A municipal committee or a Zilla Parishad or a district board, or basically any authority which is legally entrusted to deal in the local fund, right? They are known as local authority. So they are legally entitled or entrusted by central government or state government with the control or management of municipal or local fund. Then they are known as local authority. But this criteria is not fulfilled by Delhi Development Authority, and hence Delhi Development Authority is not treated as a local authority, which means that all exemptions applicable to local authority are not going to be applicable to the Delhi Development Authority. Right, ma'am. And Municipal Corporation of Delhi is receiving services such as housekeeping, civil maintenance, furniture maintenance, horticulture, etc. Okay. So first of all, we've studied this provision that any activity that you give to these CG, SG, UT, LA people, all the services that you give to CG, SG, UT, LA people in relation to Article 243G or W. In that case, these kind of pure services or even composite supplies where goods are only up to 25%, you get exemption, right? See, government doing Article 243GW activity is not a supply only, but I giving services to government or composite services where goods are only up to 25% to government in relation to the work that they are doing for Article 243GW. This we giving services are also exempt under GST. But government clarifies here that the services that I provide to CGST UTLA should be in direct nexus with the activities of Article 243 GNW. See, understand, there can be a municipal corporation, a local authority or a government body which is taking services from common people, normal services like cleaning of office, or let's say housekeeping of office, civil maintenance of the office, furniture maintenance of the office. You cannot say that just because local authority is doing activities of Article 243 GNW, whatever services they take from anyone, will they be exempt under GST? The answer is no. See, understand. Repairing street light is an activity of Article 243 GW. So if I take a direct service, I hire an electrician comes, repairs the street light. In that case, whatever the electrician is charging will be exempt because he is giving service to local authority purely for activity under Article 243 G or W. But simply, ma'am, this corporation or the local authority is having an office and they hire someone to clean the office, to maintain the furniture of the office, etc. Will those services be exempt just because local authority is also providing 243 GW activities? The answer is no. Think of it as an education example. See, understand. Today, if a school or college is taking services which are notified, right, for examination only, or for college, let's say they say this online journals, etc. Only those things are exempt. No, if a school purchases any normal other item, of course it is going to be taxable. Or let us say hospital taking services only for healthcare related, giving services healthcare related, it is exempt. Hospital starts to give advertisement services, take other services, of course they are all taxable. Similar provision applies here, that only if the service that the CGST UTLA is taking particularly directly in relation to Article 243G activities, then only exemption applicable. So these housekeeping, horticulture, civil maintenance, furniture maintenance, etc., they are not directly in relation to performing Article 243GW activities, and therefore these other services given to CGST UTLA will not be exempt under GST. This particular paragraph is not printed in version 6 of the book. If you are using version 6 of the book, then all the amendments that I am covering in the amendment lecture are already there in your book, except for this paragraph, because it was a very particular amendment with respect to Delhi development, Delhi Municipal Corporation only. I thought they will not include it in the syllabus, and hence I omitted it. But later on, when ICI released the stat update, I matched and I found out that they have taken this in the syllabus. So please make sure that you add this one paragraph in your version 6 of the book. Rest everything is already covered. No other change you have to do in your handwritten notes. Okay, ma'am. So with this, amendments of exemption are also over. Moving on to next chapter, which is input tax credit. One amendment in section 17(5), very simple, blocked credit. They say that any tax that you pay under section 74, you will not get ITC of the same. But I already explained this part to you, that section 73 and 74 are now restricted only up to FY 23 and 24. For all the further years, we now have a separate section, and therefore the applicability of this clause also gets restricted up to FY 23-24 only. Tax that you pay under section 74 is in relation to fraud. Okay, 73 is a bona fide mistake, so their ITC is not blocked. But section 74A is a common section which contains both the situations, fraud also, not fraud also. Hence, this section is not mentioned here, and the 74 part is also now restricted up to FY 23-24 only. Right, ma'am. One small clarification to be added at the end of the chapter of input tax credit. It is with respect to ex works contract. Ma'am, what is ex works contract? See, understand. Section 16. Eligibility and conditions to claim ITC. There is a point that you should have received goods or services. When you receive the goods or services, you become eligible for ITC. Right, ma'am. Now talking about ex works contract. Ma'am, what is an ex works contract? See, understand. Normally, if I purchase a water bottle, okay, chalo, I called my supplier, placed an order that I want a water bottle at this particular address. The supplier delivered the water bottle at my address. I received it. So now I can take ITC of the same, which is not the situation with ex works contract. What happens in an ex works contract is, this is the factory of the supplier. The supplier will tell you simply that, see, I will not deliver the goods at your place. It is your responsibility. I will put the goods out of my factory. You load them into your vehicle and take at your place. So if anything happens in transit, it is your responsibility, recipient's responsibility, not the supplier's responsibility. So here government says that if you virtually see, you have not received the goods when they reach your place of business, you actually received the goods here only. Because this was the place from where your responsibility started. Even if after 1 kilometer the truck meets with an accident, of course the burden will be on you and not on the supplier, because you have taken the delivery, and then the transportation and all other things are your responsibility. So ideally, ma'am, let us say if on 30 April I took the delivery from the factory and it was 2nd May when the goods reached my place of business, in which month should I be taking ITC? considering all other conditions are fulfilled. April or May? The answer is you can take in April only, where the general provision says that the day on which you receive the goods or services, if the supplier would have taken the responsibility to deliver, then to of course you would have taken ITC on in May month only. But because this is an Ex Works contract where my responsibility as a recipient starts as soon as I take the delivery from the factory of the supplier, of course there only I become eligible to take ITC, provided all other conditions are fulfilled. So government has issued this clarification, taking example of automobile sector. So in automobile sector, generally the contract between the dealer and the original equipment manufacturer. So dealer could be anyone like Mercedes or any company you assume for that matter, right? So the Kia or Mercedes or Maruti or whatever you can think of. So they are all the original equipment manufacturers, because original equipment is car and they are manufacturing the car. Dealer are the people who purchase the cars and then sell it further to people. So normally what happens here is the contract between the dealer and the original company says that the original company will be giving the car to the dealer at the factory gate, Ex Works contract done. Now the further transportation and everything is the responsibility of dealer. So the property in the vehicle pass to the dealer at the factory gate of the original equipment manufacturer only. As soon as the goods are handed over to the transporter for further transportation, the delivery is complete on the original equipment manufacturer's part at that point of time only. Now even if the truck meets with an accident, blasts in the transit, it is none of the supplier's responsibility, which means that according to section 16(2)(b), we can understand that we have received the goods at the time when the supplier handed over the goods to transporter, because my liability, my responsibility started from that point of time only. I became owner of those goods from that point of time only, which means I can now take ITC provided all the other conditions of section 16 are fulfilled. Right, ma'am? Very, very simple clarification inserted. In ISD, Input Service Distributor, nothing, you just have to add 74A alongside 73, 74. Whenever there is any excess distribution of credit to the recipients in case of ISD, that excess amount is recovered from the recipients along with interest. Or if the provisions of demand have to be invoked till FY 23-24, it would be 73-74, and after that it would be 74A. Similar amendment in Accounts and Records chapter also. You add 74A alongside 73 and 74. If you are not maintaining your books of accounts, of course government can determine the taxes that you have not paid or short paid or ITC wrongly taken or refund wrongly taken, etc. Till FY 23-24, it is FY section 70-74, and later on it is 74A. So you insert this section also here. So these all similar and simple kind of amendments. Then moving on to next chapter, which is e-way bill. Now again very simple, it says that when an unregistered person is generating e-way bill, ma'am, is it possible? Can an unregistered person generate e-way bill? The answer is yes, but he is not having GST number. So how to log in? How to generate? No problem, don't worry. What you can do is you can provide your details online in a form named as GST ENR03. Directly you can go online, or you can physically go to the facilitation center. They will do it for you, and once all your details and documents are verified, the portal will give you a unique enrollment number. Now this unique enrollment number is not GST number. You don't have to file returns and everything. You don't have to make compliances as a registered person. This number will be used only to generate e-way bills if in case you have to. So URP generating e-way bill. E-way bill is already generated in EWB 01, but I don't have a GST number. So how do I log in? How do I generate? No problem. You provide your details in GST ENR03 form. Details will be verified, checked, and you will be returned with a unique enrollment number, which you can use further in future to generate e-way bills. Only this much small amendment? Yes, ma'am. Then moving on to next chapter, which is returns under GST. For GSTR 7, that is for people, TDS deductors filing their return. Government has clarified that if you are registered under section 51 as a TDS deductor, Every month you have to file GSTR 7. Every calendar month, 10th of the next succeeding month, you have to file GSTR 7. Ma'am, even if I did not purchase anything in this entire month, I did not deduct anybody's TDS, still you have to file a nil return, but you have to file. So we are saying that whether there is any deduction made or deduction not made, doesn't matter. As a TDS deductor, you have to file GSTR 7 for each and every calendar month by 10th of the next month. Very, very simple amendment. Right, ma'am. After that, the next amendment is with respect to late fees in case of annual return. This might come in MCQ. I am getting a feeling that this might come in MCQ, not in the descriptive part. What is this saying, ma'am? If your aggregate turnover is up to 2 crore rupees, are you required to file annual return? No, ma'am. I am required to file annual return above the turnover of 2 crore only. And talking about GSTR 9C. See, GSTR 9 is annual return. But we've also studied something about 9C. Earlier it was GST audit, then removed, but it is a self-certified reconciliation statement, right? A self-certified reconciliation statement that you have to file online on the portal. If your aggregate turnover is exceeding, tell me what amount. Ma'am, annual return I file 2 crore limit. Below 2 crore, no need to file annual return. But this GSTR 9C, the self-certified reconciliation statement, if your turnover exceeds 5 crore rupees, then you have to file. Ma'am, is there a separate time limit to file this GSTR 9C? No. The provision says that whenever you file your annual return, together only, you file GSTR 9C also. Now, ma'am, late fees, if I file my annual return late, is already prescribed. But there is no late fees if I file GSTR 9C late, which means what people can now do is, I know I have to file 9C. I filed my 9 because if I don't file GSTR 9 on time, I will be required to pay late fees. But I don't file the 9C. Whenever officer tells me, I'll say, okay, I'm filing. Anyways, there is no late fees. How does it even matter even if I file it late? So here government says that understand. We will consider your annual return to be completely filed only when you are filing it with GSTR 9C. Let us assume that you file only GSTR 9 and not 9C and the due date is gone. The late fees will continue to apply. Ma'am, the due date to file annual return is 31st December. Let's say I filed GSTR 9 on 28th December only, but I filed GSTR 9C on 6th January. Then for 6 days, late fees will be applicable. Whatever late fees is for annual return, that late fees only will be applicable because we consider full annual return to be filed only on 6th Jan only. Or let us say, ma'am, I did not file anything till 31st December. I filed both 9 and 9C on 6th Jan only. Will double late fees apply? The answer is no. Late fees will apply single only. Whether you file only 9 late, you file only 9C late, you file both late, doesn't matter. Single late fees will always apply. You think of it as you filed half return and half not filed. Means government is saying you consider both as one only. So if your aggregate turnover is greater than 5 crore rupees, your late fees for annual return will continue to apply till the date you file both 9 and 9C. Don't make this mistake of applying double late fees. It is not that late fees of 9 is same as 9C. No. Commonly, this is the late fees. The day when you file both, that will be considered as your full filing date. If any one is pending, we assume whether it is not filed only. We assume like it is not filed only and your late fees continues. So the day on which your filing of both 9 and 9C is complete, that day your late fees will stop. And late fees is this only. No amendment in that. They've just extended the late fees saying that we will continue to levy late fees till the date you file 9 and 9C both, but please do not pay double late fees. Understand this. Right, ma'am. And this simple amendment, we understand, along with 73-74, you have to insert 74A because applicability of 73-74 is now restricted. So whenever there's a difference in 2B, 3B, government can issue you demand orders and show cause notices under 73-74, now where 74A is also inserted. Right, ma'am. we are almost done with all the major chapters. I mean, the part till returns, that is we as assessees do. Now, the amendments will come in the litigation part. After I file my returns, now officer will do my assessment, audit, inspection, issue me demand orders. I will go for appeal, offences and penalties will be levied on me, etc., etc. So the part 1 of amendment, which is the procedural part that I do with the department, is over. Second part is the litigation part that department does to me, and third is the customs part. So we are already done with part 1 of the amendment video. See you all in next part of amendment video, where we will cover the litigation GST as well as customs together only. Hope the video was beneficial for you. If yes, do like, share it with your friends, drop a sweet comment. See you all.